Okay, good morning and welcome everyone to this morning's webinar with our very special guest, Professor Martin Reeves, Chief Executive of Coventry City Council. We're absolutely thrilled to be welcoming you, Martin, for this special occasion, and a huge welcome to everyone who's joined us as well this morning. I would like to say a huge thanks to Shaw, Creative and Tim Holmes specifically for sponsoring today's event and making it possible. Shaw are a creative marketing agency that's made up of an experienced blend of creatives, tech heads, wordsmiths, marketers and strategists, and are based in Leamington Spa. Shaw have been a fantastic supporter of the centre since we started and are also members of our Reimagining the Region group as well. So today's session, to put it in context, is the second of events for members of our new Reimagining the Region network. We're delighted that the group is growing both in stature and numbers each month. I obviously look forward to working with you all to develop the group as we go forward and hopefully bid COVID farewell and actually begin to open up our society. On that theme, we're obviously all far too aware of the chaos and devastation that COVID-19 has unleashed on our lives and broader society. But not many of us have had the responsibility for steering a city and a region through the crisis, through any crisis of any such scale. We're delighted to welcome Martin as our guest speaker, who's going to be sharing some of his experiences of how his organisation responded to the pandemic and the broader impact of the crisis on regional governance and decision making. The session will also consider where the opportunities are for the region and where there is potential for us to do things differently to build a better place in which, we all wish to live, study, work, invest and play in. So Martin's going to begin the session with some introductory remarks. I'm planning on then morphing into what I hope will be slightly more Michael Parkinson rather than Jeremy Paxman, and ask Martin several questions before we open the floor to our guests to ask any questions that you may have on Martin's talk, but also about the region's broader recovery and how different things could or should look post-pandemic. I would ask that guests add their comments as well as we go on Martin's words into the chat feature as well. So we'll be able to ask Martin to potentially expand on particular points and hopefully get a flavour of what everyone's particularly interested in discussing today. I'm sure you're all familiar with Martin and his work, but just a few words by way of introduction. Martin's been Chief Executive of Coventry City Council since April 2009. He was also the Chief Executive of the West Midlands Combined Authority from March 2016 to September 2017. Martin had previously been with Bedfordshire County Council for 3.5 years as Assistant Chief Executive and Chief Exec. Martin has held senior leadership roles in a district and an outer London borough and was Programme Director for Work Smart, which was Westminster City Council's flagship transformation programme. Martin spent much of his early career as a lecturer and a researcher and has a PhD in applied economics. He's a professor at Coventry University. He's the first honorary president of the Local Authorities Research and Intelligence Association and is also on the board of the Centre for Cities, who are a think tank who have been going for some time now. He's been president of the Society of Local Authority Chief Executives and is currently its national spokesperson on local government finance and future funding. He's the Local Government Association National Procurement Champion and chairs the National Cross-System Board for Sustainable Health and Social Care. Recently, Martin was once again included in the top 50 of the Local Government's Chronicles list of most influential people in local government. I suspect you've heard those words a fair few times, Martin, but I just felt it was really essential that we repeated them so everyone's aware quite of the depth of your experience. And really, it goes without saying, a huge thank you, Martin. Over to you.
Thanks for inviting me. Look, it's lovely to see so many people and most that I know, which is lovely. Or there's some new faces and new names as well, which is equally nice. So Chris, thanks for those introductory comments, very kind biog. So having established my credibility, I'll now spend 10-15 minutes knocking it down with a bunch of rambling comments about the pandemic. But Look, what I thought might be quite helpful, because I'm just conscious I really want to give value to you and then the exchange that we might have. Because one of the things that I think binds us all, and I say I don't know all of you, but we care deeply about, Coventry, the West Midlands and the Midlands. And I think I can probably guess that not only do we care deeply about our places, but we care deeply about the fact that to build something fairer, more inclusive, more prosperous for everyone going forward is an opportunity which provides a heady responsibility for all of us, but it's there to grab. But it's not going to be easy. So I thought I might do in really candid, and people have heard me say that some of this stuff before, but probably not in this way, because I've had more chance to reflect. I'm going to be really candid. I will polarize views, I have no doubt about that, but that will be deliberate. And I think I'll cover 4 areas. First of all, I will take us back to the start, because I'm not a revisionist, but you can only really understand where we're going if you understand the unique characteristics under which we entered this pandemic, and then what's happened over the last 13 months. So a little bit on that, if I may. I want to talk about our response as a city and a region. I want to then talk about the preconditions for recovery and what I think that might look like economically, socially, in terms of communities, and you'll have probably different views, or maybe some will be similar. And then finish fourthly with just some issues of learning, active learning, that I've had as a personal leader, but also I think on behalf of the city and the region as well. And again, there'll be my own views, and you can challenge them. I hope that's okay, Chris and colleagues. I think you said for me to speak for about 2 hours, is that right? Is that what you wanted?
Absolutely, that'd be wonderful, yeah.
So if I do 15 minutes or so, I'll rush through those and then we can get into a Q&A. So let's start with back to where, unfortunately, the global pandemic started, because this is incredibly important for us to understand, reflect. I'm not trying to be clever, but I was on record as saying right at the beginning that the pandemic, in terms of an emergency response, was going to be different to anything that anyone had seen before. Now, I said that from a perspective of somebody, unfortunately, you heard a bit about my bio, but having spent quite a few years in London and in very senior positions, unfortunately, I've been in the wrong place at the wrong time and had to respond to some very high profile national incidents, including significant loss of life and terrorist effects, which are atrocious. They are horrendous as emergencies. They are indescribable and they stay with you forever. But the reason I said that I felt that the pandemic is going to be different to anything I had been involved in before, and any of us have been involved in before, because of the following fact. It was actually never going to be easy to have what I call a punctuation mark, and preferably a full stop, between the emergency response itself to the pandemic and then the recovery. I said at best it was going to be a semicolon. And so it was actually going to be both acute in terms of a response and chronic at the same time. And I wish I were wrong, but I've been proved to be right on that in terms of the false starts we've had to move towards a road to recovery, where in fact many of us were still heads down in the middle of one of the toughest emergency responses we've ever been involved in. So that was a unique characteristic, and this is really important to understand, because we can't have that usual blue lights come in, emergency services, of which we're probably the best in the world, deal with an emergency situation, full stop, we then move on with our community, often with a local authority lead, into recovery. That was never going to be neat. The other thing I said was I felt that this was probably going to be an 18-month process of standing up our response before we could get into that full-scale recovery. Again, I wish I were wrong, but I've been proved probably roughly right on what that is starting to look like in terms of now our roadmap to recovery. And then I suppose the final bit about why this has been a unique environment for everybody is exactly that. It has affected everybody. Most others, if not all other disasters, emergencies, even global issues, you can find through history, when you read about the evaluation of them, the impact that actually certain communities, certain parts of the geography, for different reasons, have remained literally immune from the impact, either immediately or in the aftermath of that. There's literally nobody that has remained and continues to remain immune from the impact of the pandemic. Now, I will come back to the fact that unfortunately and sadly, and perhaps also not surprisingly, that impact hasn't fallen equally, and it's something that I'm sad about and we need to talk about. But actually, the more important point at this stage is, as we entered it, we then need to understand that every single facet of the way we live, from our own personal concerns about our own health and well-being, to that of our family and friends, to businesses, to communities, to places, everything has and was affected, mostly adversely as a result of this pandemic. So grim, really grim. But I guess the fact that and again, people have heard me reflect on some of this, the fact that right from day one, I was involved both in terms of running, in effect, what we're calling Gold Command emergency response for Coventry. But I was also asked to lead on the Gold Command response for the region as well, including now I chair with Nick Page from Solihull Council, the strategic coordinating group for the whole of the West Midlands area, which involves obviously our police colleagues, all our health colleagues, fire, etc. Shows at least, and I'm saying I haven't made mistakes, I've clearly made mistakes, I've no doubt right from the start, but I've been involved right at the cutting edge of the response of both the city and the region, and working with central government. So any of the comments I make about our response going forward, about what I think about the government's response, are done apolitically, genuinely, but more importantly from a position of knowledge and experience. This is not third hand. I've been the one that's been having those conversations, I've had to make those decisions and judgments as a result of what has happened through national government policy and the impact it's had on Coventry and the region. So I could say more about where that all landed. The one final bit on my first block about the pandemic and unique nature is the other thing I said was that when I was here in the first few weeks, when we were thinking about the epidemiology, the disease, where it was going, and there were people saying, well, actually, this doesn't know class boundaries or gender boundaries or ethnicity boundaries. At one level, there was a sense of no one is immune. But again, I made a comment very early on the record as saying every single pandemic, every single population health shock we've seen in history differentially impacts those down the existing inequalities lines. And do you know what? Above everything else I'm sharing with you at the beginning, I wish I were wrong on that. And I wish that what had happened was we saw a different kind of profile. But unfortunately, we've seen the structural inequalities that Coventry entered the pandemic with and the West Midlands entered in have now been widened and deepened as a result of what we've seen over the last 13 months. And we can't deny that. I don't just mean from the empowerment coming through Black Lives Matter and some of the mobilisation and the dissemination that we've seen through that. I'm talking, as well as that, so many other issues which, if we don't acknowledge a different way of reimagining our city and our region going forward, then I think that's the most disrespectful thing we can do as leaders and people that care to those that have suffered, continue to suffer through the pandemic. We have a chance, we have a moment to build very differently for the future. But I worry that we haven't done that in the past, and we might miss the opportunity again this time. So that's the first bit. The second bit about the response. It'd be easy to say, wouldn't it, that Coventry in the West Midlands has responded more effectively than any other part of the country. So, well, you would say it, wouldn't you? We're probably seen, in fact, we're definitely seen from the national position of colleagues like myself who chair either local resilience forums or the strategic coordinating group, which is the emergency response. We're probably seen as best practice in terms of the fact we set up before anybody else. We declared that emergency situation, and by the, just a reminder, we are still in an emergency situation. That has not changed. We continue to be in a state of an emergency incident for the region and for the city. And actually, we went early, we mobilised early. We've got an incredibly strong network across the entire region, and that's mirrored particularly in Coventry with our One Coventry approach. So actually, factually, we've been seen to do it. Of course, we've made mistakes, but we've done it very well in terms of our resilience. Our mutual aid has been exceptional. And just focusing on Coventry for one moment, again, mistakes have been made. I know I would have made some because it's been unique, it's been novel, and we've had to work very, very quickly. No rule book, no textbook, actually no playbook, just responding as best we can to the situation as it has unveiled has meant that it's been incredibly challenging. But let's just focus, Chris said in my introduction, I come from an academic background, so evidence, intelligence, data is really, really important to me, and about integrity. So people can have their own views about how well Coventry has responded or not, but let's just look at the facts. It is nothing short of a miracle. If you look at the epidemiology and the various disease curves, to see Coventry with a highly, in terms of its demography, but also as a young population with our universities, but also in terms of a very densely populated urban core. As everyone knows on this core, a very, very dense city centre core, but actually you can, pretty much from city centre to outer city limits, you're talking 6 or 7 miles. So this is a high growth population area, highly dense, very urban. Everything was pointing to significant characteristics to say that we would have spiked higher than many other areas of the West Midlands and maintained a high level of disease right from the start. Facts are completely opposite. We have trailed at the lowest or the lower end of the entire West Midlands combined authority areas right from the start. With the exception of a few tiny spikes and a few outbreaks, we've actually continued that. Now, that doesn't say that others have done it wrong, but it's not serendipity. Let's just be clear about this. That is not just luck and a series of associated factors. That's enduring, and it's because we went very early on regulation and control in certain areas. We went very big on outbreak management, certainly within businesses who by and large have been brilliant. Not all, some of the big ones needed to take a long, hard look at themselves in the early stages. But by and large, we've seen really good compliance by conventions, by businesses, an amazing collegiate effort across the city from very early on, with a really strong sense of doing the right thing and compliance. So that understanding of the data, going after it early, being strong, has really hallmarked our response in Coventry, in my view, and indeed across the West Midlands. So we should be at least proud of that and pleased that to a certain degree, the pressures on our hospital system in Coventry and Warwickshire has been really tough, but has never got to the point of it being sort of out of control. And if anything, we've provided a significant national mutual aid as well as to other areas of our region. So that I think has been strong. But the thing, before I talk about recovery itself, the thing that I've been most impressed about, and again, I'd be really interested in everyone's view, both from Coventry, because that's what I really want to focus on today and I'm passionate about, but the region as well, is whilst maintaining that response in the way that I've suggested and trying to keep the disease under control and keeping businesses as best we could afloat and supporting those grants out. Often it was money in, money out, high administrative burden, but we did very well in Coventry and the region and continue to do so. As well as that, we were able to focus on what I call the preconditions for the recovery. So symbols, great symbols of potential confidence and success. We didn't turn our eyes away from that. So the fact that we've been able at a regional level to continue to drive forward the plans for the Commonwealth Games and significant developments, just heard about the most recent one in terms of the inward investment decision from Goldman Sachs, but actually at various points for the region across the last 13 months, we've actually seen significant nationally profiled wins in terms of inward investment, economic success, and really big newsworthy stories. In Coventry, in terms of our continued preparation for UK City of Culture, which has been phenomenal for the team to continue to be able to think about that with so many changes that have happened, not just on guidelines, but just in terms of people's appetite for what this could look like for a city and a region that's still struggling through the pandemic, has meant, in my view, that confidence, the thinking about one of the biggest icons, if we're going to be honest about it, of retail decline, of city centre retail decline in the country, of IKEA closing down, to then almost like the classic phoenix coming up as not just nationally, internationally media attention of that becoming a national arts collection centre for the future, is a symbol. And I keep talking about the importance of these emblems and symbols of confidence, of success. And what I've been really impressed with is that the city and the region have been able to not just deal with the here and now and the sustenance as best we can of communities, helping them with their own independence and resilience, and our businesses at large scale globals, OEMs, right the way through to our 1 and 2 person startups and really important part of our supply chain, we've actually kept our eye on the future preconditions for the recovery because we know it's coming. We're just not quite sure how and when. And everyone should, I think, take pause and reflect on that, because the truth about the region, again, thinking about the evidence before I come on to recovery, is that coming into the pandemic, both Coventry and the region, including the 2 cities of Birmingham and Wolverhampton, were showing significant, really bright shards of light around productivity, inward investment, real strength. Those conditions and characteristics haven't gone away, just the pandemic's happened. The impact, because of the structural nature of our region, means that the West Midlands, including Coventry, is and will be impacted more harshly in some areas, certainly on unemployment and skills, as well as some of the EU challenges on import-export, than any other region in the country. That's fact. But equally, because we're thinking about the preconditions for recovery and carrying on doing the right things for what that recovery looks like, also, in my view, means Coventry and the West Midlands could come out of recovery sharper, more enduring, and more balanced and equal than any other part of the country as well. That's why I keep talking about the opportunities in front of us. And before I go on to the third bit of recovery, I want to say this. I'm not saying it just to sustain myself as a chief exec. I've been here 12 years, and just to say it for the sake of it about our politicians. But let me say this, because I'm going to talk about central government when it will get a bit juicy. Right from day one, just bear in mind that, and this was the right thing to do, from the point at which we were mobilised on this emergency response and thinking about how we could respond going forward. In terms of decision making, emergency powers were vested in me as a chief executive. This was not unusual, by the way. This happened up and down the country. It's pretty normal procedure under this kind of environment to vest significant, normally distributed by elected members, decision making through full council, cabinet or other mechanisms, actually to go through the chief executive. Let me tell you that whilst some people might think that chief execs in local government and public services love that kind of power, it is completely an anathema to how we work. Because the reason we do our job is to understand respectfully where our operational decision making ends and where the legitimacy of public funded decisions are authenticated through the elected member body. So it's not an easy place to be, but it's the right decision to make, and we did that. But this is a point about our local politicians, and it's true actually across the entire region, because I've seen it firsthand. The maturity of our political leadership to understand that, to go with the grain, to continue to find informal mechanisms for making sure that their policies are understood and they continue to shape that decision making whilst respecting that the normal processes of making decisions has been changed for the short term, has been phenomenal. And our recovery as we look forward will not be as potentially optimistic if we didn't have that maturity of political leadership. And I have to say that is both in terms of administrations across Coventry and the region, as it is opposition as well, who also was struggling with understanding their legitimacy of how they could have their voices heard during a time when meetings in person were suspended, and it was very difficult to actually hold people to account face to face. So I want to do that shout out because I have to tell you, it's a very different level of reflective learning and maturity than we've seen from central government. And I say this as an apolitical statement. I'm just telling you the facts about the immediate response of make a decision, understand whether it was the right one, what are the implications, learn quickly and be humble enough to go again and try something different was the hallmark of Coventry in the region during this pandemic. It hasn't been the hallmark of a central government response. More of that later. So then in terms of, this is my third bit, I'm getting there, I promise. Look, as well as all of the challenges which are obvious and really, really damaging to our supply chain, our businesses, communities, individual levels of potential poverty increasing for those families that certainly in Coventry and the region we'd worked really hard with over the last 5 or 6 years to lift into having some options and some choices. As well as that, and that is clearly here and being seen, we've had what, leading into this precondition for recovery, a lot of what people are calling the hidden harms. I don't see it as hidden harms. I think they're becoming clear and present too. So levels of domestic violence and abuse, levels of mental health, ill health, as well as what we're now seeing as National Health Service thinks about moving beyond that blue light response and the acute issues, thinks about how it can play catch up on diagnoses that have been missed, treatments that have been missed, elective surgery, etc. All of that puts into a mix of our recovery, if you remember what I said, is not going to be, for Coventry and the region, fine, full stop, let's now move on to recovery. It has to be still a mixture of playing catch up, dealing with not only the demands that came into the pandemic on our big services, but massive new demands, which would make even my hair curl. I mean, these are big macro, also local demands on our services, and they're complex, and they're going to take years and years to understand. A time when our recovery is contingent, in my view, on the one bit of the government machinery which has been proved right from day one to work and will work only for recovery in this way, is that local responses are the best way of recovering. They always have been, it's been proven, but they will be with this. And everything we've learned over the last 12 months or so has been that local responses, local decision making, linking and gluing people in local places together is the way in which you endure and you build resilience which is long lasting, not through some command and control top down approach. Therefore, we've got to find a way of being ready for that, willing and able, with a local government system that actually is still facing the harshest, deepest revenue cuts that we've ever seen. And whilst we've been supported by central government on the costs of COVID directly, and our government department has been brilliant, in all fairness, with us in terms of understanding that, income's lost, these new demand spikes I've talked about, which aren't hidden any longer, they're becoming known, I even talked about social care, need to be dealt with a revenue base which is not as is, it needs to be bigger than it's ever been before. And there are no signs at the moment the central government will support local government in the way that we need the resource, the capacity to be able to deliver with our partners going forward. And that really worries me, and it should worry all of us. Linked to a recovery, that again, this is where you'll have your own views on this, where levelling up, where a sense of building back better, a sense of what I said, grabbing that opportunity for the UK, but for us, for Coventry and the West Midlands, which is about providing opportunities for all and reducing the structural inequalities, not making them wider and deeper, is a levelling up process that has two major problems for Coventry. The first one is we miss out. So the algorithm and the formulas used around levelling up itself and the funding, we're not prioritised at the top end. I could talk a lot about that, but that's the facts. And in terms of our community recovery and the conditions, the preconditions for, priming and moving forward with a much more balanced recovery, we're not prioritising that fund either. Now, other parts of the West Midlands are, and that's great. It gives me great pleasure that they are, and that's brilliant. Solihull, Coventry miss out significantly, as does Warwickshire, actually. That's a problem. So actually just the ability to understand where the cash is going to come in. But probably more worrying for me, and I've been consistent about this for years, the equation of recovery for our communities and for our economic recovery is based predominantly, almost exclusively, on capital and infrastructure build and capitalisation out of this pandemic. Now, no one would ever hear me say, no thanks, we don't want that capital, we don't want that funding. But the gap is now getting bigger, in my view. In fact, it's not in my view, it's the evidence. The gap will get bigger in our places, like Coventry and the West Midlands, between the capital sums to deliver the infrastructure required for economic futures and this recovery, and actually the revenue and the capacity that our public bodies have got, and particularly local authorities and community groups, to be able to sustain and grow the independence that's required, the resilience to build back fairer. That's a problem. And the reason it's like that is because, let's be honest, capital pots allocated for the levelling up agenda for the infrastructure are relatively straightforward. What's difficult is really dealing with the tax base and the revenue funding for local government, and having the kind of local government adult social care funded for the future that we need. I'm not saying they're easy political decisions, but we've got to call this out, and I will continue to call this out nationally. That's a problem. So having said all of that, I'm really quite excited, and that's a difficult word to use, with the hell that many of our communities and people have been through for the last year and continue to be challenged by this pandemic. But I'm excited that despite what I've just said about some of the structural funding issues, Coventry's confidence levels and the regions with regards to some of those big symbols that have been primed, the fact that what we've known above all through this pandemic is that our communities, in our case, our One Coventry approach has been so strong, so collaborative, so kind of focused on what we need to do, that I think it bodes well for what will be inevitably a long and challenging recovery. But I really think we've got reasons to be optimistic in Coventry and the West Midlands. So then the final bit, and then I'll shut up. There's clearly a lot of issues that have been learned. So I'm just going to say how it is, because these are really important, aren't they, in terms of the question that we all need to answer is, what else do we need to do individually and together and at our organisations, whether we're small businesses, large businesses, public bodies, in order to ensure that we create a reimagined future and a reimagined set of places which gives much more equality and equity of access than ever before. What do we need to do differently? What do we need to do more of in that space? And if we're charged with that, surely it's incumbent on all of us, whatever our roles, personally for our own integrity, but as leaders, to turn around and go, what have we learned for what has been a really artificial set of circumstances, but they've been playing out, which means that we can adapt very quickly and not make those same mistakes again. And I think we have to start with the central government response, because actually what's happened right from the beginning, and I would argue with the exception and the glowing exception of what's happened most recently with regards to the vaccination rollout, the procurement of the various vaccines, the backing of strong, fast regulation through the healthcare system into the deployment with an NHS-led, but a brilliant local support structure. With that glowing exception, along with some significant up procurement of lateral flow device testing capacity, the response of central government from the point of the blue lights point onwards from that pandemic around personal protective equipment, the shielding of the most vulnerable, including food and supplies and medicines out, to the test and trace system, has been well below what was being required, in my view, for delivering and responding effectively to this pandemic. Now, I say that in the context of a unique environment. All of us were thinking, I've not seen this before, what chapter do I go to? But my point is this, that others will have their view about the efficacy. There will have to be a review at some point, more substantively, about what went well, what didn't go so well, so we can learn, because there will be another pandemic in the future. But my point is more about dynamic learning, because actually myself in my role that I've mentioned, many other local government people in particular were saying, this is not going to work. We have to think about a different way in real time to change that approach, those protocols, because unless we do that, we will not get the outcomes that we need, and there will be more loss. We were saying this right from me, but there wasn't sufficient dynamic, reflective learning, and so we ended up with the same mistakes being played out. We cannot allow that to happen as we come into recovery. And the other bit of learning, which I've mentioned before, is that One Coventry, collaboration, open systems learning, thinking about the way in which communities mobilise themselves across PPE, shielding, testing, and many other things, is the enduring way in which we will recover more equally and more fairly. So we've got to find a way of continuing to let go, understand as public leaders how we can actually facilitate and enable that to happen better. And then I guess the final bit is some fascinating learning that I think we've all got to have around why is it that through this, unique environment, we've been able to work quicker, work more productively in some areas, work certainly more collaboratively, cut through a lot of stuff that stopped us from making decisions, doing the right thing in the past. Why have we been able to do this under these circumstances? Has it been just because of the nature of the pandemic, or has something else happened in terms of unlocking a very different kind of sense of collaboration? Because it's true that things have been done not just at pace, but with a conviction that pre-pandemic would have not been on the table. I haven't got all the answers to this, but one thing I'll leave you with is that I talk about a bungee, and I think this bungee has been, as a rope, has been on full expansion and full extension right from the start of the pandemic. What we must not allow is that the natural human, organisational, business, public sector leader issue about going back to where we were and allowing that natural, and it is a natural position for human beings to go back to a position of comfort and where they once were. What we've got to do together is find a way of those things that are amazing for our recovery in Coventry and the West Midlands, to harness them, to do it more, to build it into our way of working. Those things that we know haven't worked, jettison them. And those things that are really important for us to have an anchor to go back to. And let me tell you, face-to-face, working with people creatively, there is no substitute for this. I'm a massive fan of collaborative productivity tools. We've been proved that we can work on this way. There is no substitute for coming back. So as we create that kind of amazing kind of sense of people working with each other, understanding their issues, being face-to-face, let's nurture that in a new hybrid way. But my point is, let's not allow us to go back. I don't buy in totally to this notion of this amazing outpouring of kindness, generosity and thoughtfulness across communities was a result of the pandemic. No, what happened was this got accelerated and announced more loudly as a result of what was going on. I don't mean the claps on a Thursday night. I mean generally people doing some amazing stuff for each other when actually they were more worried about themselves. But Coventry's always done that. The West Midlands has always had an amazing reputation for doing that. The question is why we've not unleashed it, mainstreamed it well enough, and continue to think that it's only local authorities, public bodies, the kind of institutes of government that can really make those kinds of things happen. So they're the four areas I wanted to share with. I was almost getting on for 2 hours there, Chris, but I'll shut up there. It's avoided you being a Michael Parkinson or worse. Look, even if some of that was useful, then I'm glad, and I'm happy now to get into a Q&A.
Martin, that's extremely helpful insights, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I suppose just a couple of reflections really from me. You talked about obviously the importance of local decision making and local response. Do you feel that the pandemic has raised the profile, raised the respect levels of local government within national government?
It's a really good question, and been asked this a few times, Chris. The phrase parity of esteem has been used a few times through the pandemic. My sense was that the point of highest tide line for local government's respect to central government, and indeed the country actually, was probably the point, if you remember, when we were in the sort of first wave and the Thursday night clap for the NHS, which by the way was completely deserved and everything else, started to create a narrative around the thanks to social care colleagues as well. Oh, they're in local government, aren't they? And then a bit about our refuse collectors. And there was a bit of a narrative outpouring of a sense of, wow, some of this local response has been really, really impressive. That was our highest tide point. And I was on the record as saying, even at that point, there was no parity of esteem. We were still seeing ministers and others saying, actually, local government has led this response locally and has, without them, we would be in a lot more trouble. And yet the word's not translating into action of actually thinking about the centrality of local government in all of its forms. I think we're our own worst enemy. I've always said this as well. I'm a massive advocate for local government for obvious reasons. I'm also our harshest critic. Our narrative is not compelling. People don't understand what local government does. Even in my own family, and I've been in this forever, don't really understand exactly the decisions, the services that within local government. So I think we need to use an opportunity to bring it down to the personal level about what we do. We had a chance, we grabbed some of it, but as always, local government, we just got on with it. So no, I across every single colour of government administration, there's never been a parity of esteem for local government within kind of NHS context. That's why we're still arguing and failing in the argument to have a long-term settlement for local government and adult social care. I wish I could be more optimistic, but there's nothing suggesting to me that that will change anytime soon, despite all of the evidence and all the ministers and civil servants saying what worked best, as I say, was a local integration of systems, and that's where we should be building the future.
And you obviously speak about, sort of the public's perceptions of what local government does. How did having a regional layer of government introduced through the combined authority and the mayor, how did that impact your decision making through the pandemic? Was it a help or a hindrance?
It was a help, and the number of reasons why it was a help. I would argue the three biggest reasons. Number one is in terms of our argument, and a compelling argument to central government, for example, for resourcing through the pandemic, for the augmentation of test and trace, personal protective equipment, the shielding. That argument to be done at a regional level, including not just the 7 Mets and the direct elected mayor, but that wider body was really powerful, and more powerful than an individual set of places making that argument, number one. Number two, it was an amazing opportunity to learn, not just quickly, but together. Because whilst Coventry was trying to understand its outbreak management, to have then 6 other places constituently, but also other areas going, well, actually, we've just seen a spike here, and we think public health colleagues can probably share why we went in early. That can never be substituted with individual learning. So that was really powerful. Then the third bit, which might sound really practical, but really important, we were able to mobilize around mutual aid and around support. And I called it a graphic equalizer. At various points, we were able to think about Black countries really struggling either for capacity or issues at the moment, or businesses particularly are struggling. We were able to almost graphic equalize and think about how we could push and pull some of our army support, police, fire, rescue, health, but local government, community volunteering across that whole region. I think that proved to be really important, as well, as certainly as we were through some of the really dark days of the pandemic, actually, and the acute system in the hospital sector was really struggling. And on top of that, we were worried about making sure that the businesses were still being supported, that we were getting food and supplies out to those that needed it, etc. So, yeah, I think by and large, it worked well regionally. The superstructures that I chair on the strategic coordinating group is incredibly important, because a lot of our health and social care moves across that big area, and it just gives you some resilience, Chris. Pandemics are really hard, for the reasons I said right at the beginning, and to have people that are kind of going through it and picking you up and saying, well, actually, I'll cover this for you today, Martin, or we can do this, or having a region through the combined authority, through the mayor and through Deborah Cadman and a team that go, do you know what, on PPE, we can create an overall register. Coventry can go and deliver its own stuff, but we can take that pressure off you. It's been really helpful, actually, overall.
And you mentioned, test and trace briefly. Clearly it's had an absolute battering in the press, and it's, all sorts of commentary around it, the cost of the scheme. But what's your experience been on the ground? Has it been an effective tool for you locally in managing infection rates?
No, so the reason I mentioned, I wasn't boasting, because you can't boast when we've still lost far too many people in Coventry, but the fact we've subdued and suppressed the disease numbers means that, with the exception of the run-up, unfortunately, to Christmas, and then the immediate run-out after Christmas on the spikes, which clearly affected Coventry badly as it did everywhere else in the West Midlands, with that exception, we've kept the prevalence under a level which meant our public health teams, and this is a key point, our public health teams, who, guess what, know quite a bit about infection and about where people have been and coincidence, and guess what, they know the places. Isn't that funny? They kind of know the places rather than a remote contact environment, of being able to stay on top of it. So, hi Chris, understand you've tested positively. Can we just talk? And sorry, but we're going to have to backtrack a little bit about where you are. That's the power of suppressing a disease like this, to then be able to not just get those individuals to do the right thing. So all the time we were keeping our numbers relatively okay. Many places like Coventry were able to have our own local test and trace environment, which I would argue, and the public health experts would argue, has been so much more effective than a national system where the attrition was incredibly high, the contact rates were far too low, but above all, didn't have necessarily that local knowledge and empathy to go, okay, I get it, because what appears on a computer screen can make sense to an algorithm. It doesn't then make sense when you understand the geography and the locality. You go, oh, I get it. That sounds really worrying, but it's not. I get it, because those two businesses are linked or whatever. So, yeah, it was about local. Look, it's not political. I stay well away from the politics. I've been really careful to say that. All I'm saying is, we made it clear right from the beginning, fund a system which is locally delivered. We'll need some national augmented resource infrastructure. We'll gear up. No. this is going to be a national use. Fine, it will fail, and it did.
Very interesting indeed. Martin, I could ask you questions all morning, as I'm sure you can imagine, but I'm actually going to pass over to our guests now. There we go. Fantastic. Over to you, Clive. You may need to just unmute there, Clive.
Yeah, morning, Martin. You mentioned the Levelling Up Fund, but isn't that likely to go more north than Coventry? How can we ensure that Coventry gets a share of that Levelling Up Fund?
Yeah, we're not in the top priority group. That doesn't mean to say that Coventry bidding is precluded, but clearly those in the top priority will be given clearly preference. So two answers to this really. One is we need to think as a city much more broadly and much long term about the kind of funding infrastructure that we require. So for example, a lot of our future recovery, in my view, will be built on green futures. You've obviously heard about what we're trying to do on Gigafactory, but the electrification ecosystem as well. So actually there are probably better ways to pump prime and fund that in the medium to long term anyway than, for example, capital from the Levelling Up Fund. So we need to, as Coventry has always been with Warwickshire, kind of, okay, if we're going to miss out on those, what are the other alternative sources? So I'm thinking there, for example, bonds. There's some really interesting work we're doing with Treasury at the moment about future infrastructure for green technologies using green bonds in effect. So I'm not downbeat, but second bit, which is perhaps more important, again, like we've always been, we'll just be really cute. Because we've got a strong regional infrastructure, Solihull and ourselves and Warwickshire are out with prioritisation, including for the community funding as well, but the Birmingham and the Black Country are in. So because we're conjoined on so many of the big levelling up infrastructure projects like transport, a lot of the cultural work as well, we can find ways of using their prioritisation to bid for those projects and infrastructure that will also have a massive impact and positively so on Coventry. So we'll just need to sort of play that carefully. But I do finish, Clive, with the bit that I mentioned, which I've been, again, consistent about. People are fixated by levelling up funding. They're fixated by a lot of the pots that have come out, fixated by what we're going to get to replace, clearly, the EU structural funding. And these are really important conversations. Let me tell you, they don't keep me awake at night. What keeps me awake at night as a Chief Executive of Coventry City Council is the fact that our revenue base, our capacity to be able to even manage these big projects, let alone manage them well and equally, is being receded. People are knackered. We will lose people out of the system as a result of what they've gone through over the last year. Unless we get funded in revenue terms properly, then you can have as much capital as you like. It'd just be shiny new stuff, if you're lucky. Yeah, let's all lobby together for the proper resourcing of local public services, and yeah, we'll get what we need out of the capital. We're ingenious when it comes to this. We'll be all right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Clive. And now over to you, Debbie.
Well, thanks very much, Martin. That was absolutely fascinating and very detailed. One of the things I'm interested in is the idea of COVID certificates. I know we're not meant to call them COVID passports because people react quite strongly to that. What's your opinion on that and on the equality of, if we do have those, how that will affect some people in our society or in our communities?
Yeah, I'm watching the debate, Debbie, really interestingly around this. My own personal view is that what we've done well on in Coventry and many parts of the West Midlands over the pandemic has been voluntary. Again, this is just personal view. It's been not highly regulated. It's been a sense of not enforced. It's been a sense of doing the right thing. And you might say, Martin, that doesn't play out in a pandemic or any other time, but actually thinking about if we say under protocols, go and get a lateral flow test and get it as close to the point at which you're re-entering a public building or an event. And if we're saying when you get called for a vaccine, go and get vaccine, etc., that to then follow that through with a significant bit of regulation enforcement, I think is problematic. It's problematic for the equality reasons you mentioned, but also in terms of the actual administration and the enforcement of that. I know there's digital potential for all of this. So I first and foremost would want to go for a system whereby people more and more mainstream understand that it's a legitimate part of us opening back up again fully, going to our theatres, going to our pubs and the inside pubs, going about the workplaces, and workplaces have been fantastic, small, medium and large, by and large, to go above and beyond just what's expected of them. Some have let themselves down, but most have actually done the right thing without heavy enforcement necessarily. It's the right thing to make workers feel that their co-workers are LFT tested, that they've had, but actually not to ostracize people for different reasons if they haven't, and then maybe socially distance in a different way. So I guess you've probably heard from me, I'm more probably of a sense of not going down a rigid enforcement route. It's difficult to apply. It creates those inequality issues, but let's look at what's worked. And what's worked is this discretion and voluntary effort. And by and large, you know, people have done the right thing. I know there's always examples where they haven't, but by and large, there's been really heavy levels of compliance.
Thank you.
Okay, over to Afzal. You might need to just unmute there, Afzal. There we go.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chris. Hi, Martin.
Hi, good to see you. It's been a while.
Yes, you too. You too. Martin, we've heard previously about recovering back better and fairer, and I think back to although it's a different crisis, 2008 and the economic crash. Yet the reality across the region rarely matches the rhetoric, and inequalities we know have widened nationally and in the region. I suppose in Coventry, thinking about what's happened, particularly the one Coventry, or you called it, one Coventry approach, how will it be different this time? And in what practical ways will you hope that it's different?
Well, the ways that I hope it's different and we're intending is probably symbolised by the fact that when we looked at shielding, when we looked at, let me give you an even better example, when we had the really big policy, should we say, a problem the government got itself into around free school meals outside of core term time. What I was fascinated to watch in Coventry, and these are just the facts, is the mobilisation of the community sector to, in effect, provide that solution rather than local government saying we'll just fund it and just hope that it hits the mark. And you might say, well, why do you start there with the answer? Well, for me, the answer, and I know phrases like co-production, co-design come out all the time, Absol, and it's all just words, but actually what worked there was exactly that. So what I'm hoping for is that genie being let out of the bottle, if you like, and people that were naysayers before now realizing this is the way in which you do build resilience and proper answers. And actually, if you do it that way, the faces, the voices that are in those solutions are the very authentic leaders in our communities we need in order to stop the continuation of why we are where we are, which is predominantly people like me, white middle-aged blokes making decisions probably with good intent, but actually very top down without really understanding the implications and probably unintended as well as the intended implications. So I think if we can, my bungee example, if we can hold on to that tension and the positive tension and move it forward, I think we can do things better. But you know what? The inequality issues down race line, ethnicity lines, gender lines, age lines, it is just, I could just cry, I could inwardly weep in terms of what has happened. So the idea this could be fine in a couple of years' time, this is a decade of work to structurally go after this. And I suppose the final bit I'll say on this is it's more than just hard wiring. This is everything has to change. And we're never going to get another chance to do this. So my cautious optimism at the start was that we do have an opportunity to do this differently. My slight downside moments are when we've not really done this in the past. Why is it going to be different now? But I do think people now realise that actually different voices, different approaches, different solutions are the way in which you create independence which is enduring, resilience which is enduring, and better solutions actually to high demands. I think they've seen that with their own eyes, even if they weren't believers before.
Thank you ever so much, Afzal. Thank you. And over to you, Joe.
Martin, good morning. Fantastic, inspirational presentation there. You've certainly brought such discipline into the way that you've looked after our city and the region, in fact. And as far as the day-to-day issues that you've spoken about, you've kept an absolute hold on that, as well as the capital projects with City of Culture, with the Culture Centre, the IKEA Centre, the railway station, and everything else that's going on in the city. Fantastic. Now, you've talked about being a busy man, doing all these things, and how actually, in a funny sort of way, the pandemic has helped with these Zoom calls where you can go on one straight on to another and another and another and achieve. I've done exactly the same. And once we've got City of Culture underway, what are your desires for the next 5 years? What, and I'm going to say capital because I'd like to hear what capital projects you would like to deliver in the next 5 years that really you see as a game changer in the city.
Oh, that's a really good question, Joe. Good to see you. What I'd like to see over that 5-year period is Coventry grabbing the future green technology agenda on infrastructure. And I know everyone's excited by the Gigafactory, and so we should be, but the Gigafactory has merely 20% of an overall package of the electrification, renewables, and thinking differently about not just future mobility, but about how Coventry can, and the West Midlands actually, but Coventry can think about that ingenuity, that advanced manufacturing, engineering, automotive, particularly from the past, can be projected with digital and green futures. So for me, if we reconvene in 5 years' time, I would hope and I would like to have seen massive push on 5G. It will probably be beyond that then, but augmented reality, machine learning, artificial intelligence, absolutely critical to solving some of the issues that we don't even think we can solve now. And I'm going in the line of wearable technologies for health, rapid diagnosis. I think Coventry can lead the country in some of that. And then the other, I want to see not just a gigafactory, but and the growth of the UK Battery Industrialisation Centre. I want to see very light rail becoming something as a future mobility and a platform for completely seamless suburban travel, but linked into the other connectivities into London and elsewhere. For me, would be the future. And I suppose the obvious thing to say is, whilst we won't be there, we'd have gone a lot further, Joe, about rebuilding and reimagining a city centre. Which actually is not about retail. It's about people spending time together, animated culture, leisure, living in a way that we would never have imagined before, and actually a sustainable city centre with people with very different backgrounds coming together, and the city centre of Coventry feeling like it's not for other people, it's for us, and feeling like that feels penetrable to Coventrians. So they're the things that I would love us to have made massive inroads on within the next 5 years.
Having spent Monday evening for a few hours on the top of the Telegraph Hotel on the roof bar, I can assure you that Coventry looks good even now. It looks fantastic. Yeah,
it's been nothing short of a miracle that we've kept all that public realm going, and by and large we'll deliver it for the middle of May. The railway station might take a little bit longer for final completion, but the rest of it, that's my point. How do you parallel track a response, but the preconditions for recovery? I'm an economist, you know that, Joe. You can have loads of technical conversations about economic recovery, about what depressions do. Let me tell you what has been the hallmark of all recoveries is consumer confidence, is confidence in investment markets, and they're not very sophisticated. They're by and large showing that we're up for this and we're moving on. And it's like the Marines always say, if you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl, but keep moving forward. And that confidence for Coventry in the West Midlands has been different than anywhere else in the country, in my view.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Joe. Martin, I'm conscious we're at 10 o'clock. Are we okay to ask one more question, or do you need to
go for it. No, go for it.
I've got to shoot off on another one.
Thanks ever so much, Joe. Over to you, Jason. And then we've got Carol just after that as well, Martin, if that's okay. Over to you, Jason.
Okay, thanks, Mark. It's really, really insightful. I work primarily with the hospitality industry, and I was just wondering, really, what particular advice you may have for either young people that are have been affected because of their work in hospitality and obviously been hit so directly in the region, and also any business owners that have got long-term issues financially with and so on, and are still finding things difficult, in terms of building back better and bouncing back really from all of this.
Yeah, I think, Jason, good to hear from you. The impact differentially on different sectors was pretty clear right from the beginning. The hospitality, leisure, sort of culture and arts sector, tourism has suffered more than most. And one of the most sad things throughout is, despite the business grants out, some of the alleviation, to have letters and communication from some of our smaller businesses saying, I'm going to have to chuck the tail in because actually my house is a covenant against the law. You're doing everything you can, Martin and the team, but enough's enough, right? And me saying, just hold on another 3 months, get through this next wave, and consumer confidence will come back. That's been really sad, Jason, to watch that. Your point about then what that means, well, structurally, of course, the hospitality, leisure industry and sector for us is so important for so many obvious reasons, but many more as well, because the structure of that employment has been a lifeblood for many of our families across Coventry, and that's been taken away. So that's been a problem. You've then got the fact that the demographic, as you say, is the younger ones, which we knew would be the lost generation. That's been proved. But the other thing I would say as well is that through the supply chain and thinking about other businesses supporting it, and some of the skills issues, we're seeing some massive challenges with the 50 pluses who are also finding real challenges of being unemployed, or businesses going to the wall and finding it difficult to get themselves back into the employment market. So at both ends of the age spectrum, we've got challenges, but I again inwardly weep for the sector. What I would say, and this is no relief to those that have had to fall over, those that have managed to sustain themselves some way, somehow, I think the consumer confidence, the latent demand will come back really, really sharply. So fingers crossed, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Jason. And last but not least...
Yeah, I'm being called onto another one, so I'm sorry if I'm beeping. So I must be quick with Carol.
Just finish very quickly. Thanks ever so much. Thank you, Martin.
Cool, thanks. And Martin, that was absolutely brilliant. So thank you for sharing so much knowledge about the city and the West Midlands. I really was going to ask about the Build Back Better and levelling up, as you know, with my social enterprise head on. But I thought I'd finish on, how do we really engage our local communities to support the growth in the city? We all know Coventry has a massive habit of knocking themselves. We can be really negative. So how are we going to change our communication methods, with our council leaders, the councillors, and the community at large? So finish on, how do we change the community message?
I think we have to use the opportunity that will come for us coming back together physically. I know there'll be hybrids, but I think we need to use that as an opportunity to reconnect in a very, very different way. And I think everything from emerging planning applications to the big developments that I've talked about, to the big schemes that we want to put in place, to actually go much earlier with a set of open conversations to say, what does this feel like? What does that potential impact feel like? But also to be much more comfortable and confident together in the fact that we don't need everyone to slap our backs collectively as a city and go, oh, it's amazing, well done, we're right behind. But actually to say, I think we could do this better. I think you're doing it half-baked. I think actually I've seen elsewhere better. But actually, it might look good on your imagery. When it comes down to local communities, this is going to misfire. And I think, if you say from local councillors, I want officer colleagues, and I've just literally come off a call yesterday. I want colleagues to reconnect in a way they've never reconnected with before. There's a reality check to capacity, but I want people walking about. I'm going to reinvigorate what in my first few years as a local government officer was ward visits. We're going to start walking around in the shoes of local, the local councillors, the local community champions, the local residents, just to physically see how the place has changed and to listen. And you might say, well, that's pop. It's not. It's a visual expression to say, we didn't have the answers coming into the pandemic. Trust me, we certainly don't have all the answers coming out of it.
Martin, a huge
I must go. I'm going to be in so much trouble now. I've been late for a counter-terrorism briefing. So
thank you, Martin. We are so
I must go. Lovely to see everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good luck. Cheers.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks again. So again, a huge thank you to everyone for attending today's session. It has been recorded and we will be sharing it with everyone after the session. So again, a huge thank you on behalf of the Centre for the New Midlands, and I look forward to working with you all into the future. So thank you ever so much, everyone. Thank you.
The Centre for the New Midlands is the only independent, not-for-profit think tank serving the Midlands region of the United Kingdom. Launched in 2020, our areas of interest include housing and communities, digital culture, media and sport, the Great Recovery, environment, transport and infrastructure, devolution and governance. Our initial focus is on the West Midlands. In 2021, we're launching Reimagining the Region, a regional networking group to give the West Midlands an even stronger voice. We want you to help shape the agenda for the region and work with us to create new ideas to build a stronger and more prosperous society. We will provide you with a regional network of other forward-looking organisations interested in enhancing the region in which we operate. For more information and to get involved, visit our website